Well, here on the tailgate, I've got all of the equipment back from the machine shop, and let me see if I can squeeze it all in here. So I gave him the flywheel. He did clean up the front of the flywheel, looks pretty good, and then he put a new ring gear on. The other one was chewed up pretty good from the starter engaging on it, so had him press a new one on, take the old one off, and press a new one on, so that looks pretty good. And then here is the engine block itself, and on the engine block he took out the old sleeves and put in the new sleeves, so that looks pretty good, and went ahead and degreased the block. I didn't have him dip it. I hear different things, you should dip them, you shouldn't, and I just didn't want to do something that I wasn't 100% sure on. He said if the block looked good, he wasn't going to hot dip it, but cleaned up pretty well. And then we have the oil pan right here, and he degreased that. Looks really good. Here are some of the parts that he gave me back: my old sleeves, my old ring. I don't know if the camera is going to pick up on the teeth that are chewed up. Yeah, right here. So you can see right here where the teeth are chewed up from the starter engaging on it. So let's see if I can find any more on here. Here's some more as well. Just figured it would be a good time to get that replaced, since I was already having all the other things done, is to get that done. And then in the box here I've got my camshaft and the head. Now on the head, he had told me that on between cylinder number 2 and number 3 it was warped in this area here, so he said he had to take off a little over a thou. But he said that could have been where I was losing my compression. But hard to say now. So yeah, so I've got this back. So now that I've got the engine back, I can go ahead and reassemble this and hopefully get her going here within the next week. Alright, let me get it out of the truck. I'm about to put the valves back into the block, and I don't know if it's necessary or not, since this was all cleaned and I have new valves, to go ahead and grind the surface here before I put the valves in. Now originally, I bought some grinding compound, and this little sticky tool just to do that, and I ended up now doing a whole complete engine rebuild. But I'm not sure if I need to grind each one of these valves again before I put the new ones in. But now that I've thought about it and I'm here, I'm like, well, it's not going to hurt for me to do that. Even though I've got brand new valves, I want to make sure that this is not going to be an issue when I put it all back together. Though I just put all these valves together, I think I'm going to go ahead and grind each one of these out with the valves, and then reassemble it and put it in. And then that way I know that I won't have an issue with these seating properly. It's an extra step. Actually, it's a do-over, since I already put these together. And it wasn't until I was putting them in that I realized, should I be doing that? It's not going to hurt. So I'm going to go ahead and disassemble the valves, go ahead and grind this out, reassemble them, and put them in. That way I at least know that that was done correctly. So let me go ahead and get that done, and we'll move on to the next step. So tonight I'm putting the valves in, and so I've assembled them. I've already ground the top of them here so that they seat well into the block itself. I got them assembled. I've got some oil on here. When I go to put them back into the block, we need to push down on this valve guide right here, and then once we get it in there so far, we need to slide a retaining pin into the guide right here, and it fits in there like so. So how I've been able to compress this valve guide is I slide it into the block, and then I'm not sure if I'm able to get this a good picture of this or not. Hold on one second. So as you can see in here, the valve guide is not completely depressed all the way. So what I have is a pair of long needle nose pliers like so. Here, let me get it back into the camera. A long needle nose pliers like so, and then I take that, put it into the exhaust valve here, and then I tip up on it. And what that does is that this tip allows me to push down on the guide. So I'm going to try and videotape this and show you exactly what I'm doing here. So let me find my clip here again. So I'm just going to put my pliers up inside here, and then I'm just going to pull up on it, and that compresses the guide. And when it does, it opens up the place for me to slide this in. Now, of course, now that I'm trying to videotape it, I can't get it, but that just slides. I don't think I got it. So tonight I'm adjusting the gap on the lifters and the valves. And so in order to do so, went out and got this special clip here, and it actually hooks onto one lifter while you try and tighten the other lifter. So there's a little bracket here with a little lip on it, and that goes into the one that you're trying, behind the one you're trying to tighten, and then how this lip goes on right here, this slides into the other lifter and locks in. So I'm going to try and adjust, oops, sorry, I'm on this one over here. I'm going to try and slide this in, trying to videotape it at the same time, and then lock that in. So what this does is inside the lifters, if it'll show it, there are holes on the top, and then you lock this in here, and this slides. Now what I've had to do before was at least get this side underneath this lifter, and then slowly turn this side until it locks into one of the 4 holes on top. Once that's done, then you can go ahead and turn this bolt up or down to adjust the gap between your lifter and your actual valve. And just so everyone knows, the gap on the intake valve is 12 thou, and the gap on your exhaust is 16. So a little tedious, but it's not very difficult if you have this tool right here. So I've gotten these two done. I'm working on these two, and then I'm just going to keep working my way down. Now, one of the key things in doing this is you have to make sure that the valves are in their lowest position. Alright, so I just put the crank back in, and I've got all the main bearings back in as well. So everything's finger tightened right now. I'm just going to turn. I should be able to turn this. So make sure that everything turns the way it's supposed to. Nothing's binding. I can turn it with my hand very well. So I think we're good on this. So I'll go ahead and tighten this down. Now this is supposed to be tightened down between 75 and 85 with the torque wrench. So I'll make sure that I'll probably do about 80 on these. So I'll take the torque wrench to these and tighten these down to about 80 pounds. So please, well. Alright, well I'm on my last piston here, putting in the rod, so I'm just going to put a little oil on there and then make sure I got this in the right direction. I've got my marks here and they go towards the cam. So this should slide right on here. Let's hopefully it does. And it does. Okay, so let me go ahead and tighten this up. And then what I found on the other ones is when I took this off, it had cotter pins in the castle nuts. But just the way I bought new castle nuts just so that I can tighten them down and get the right torque setting on them. But the groove in here is a lot smaller, and the cotter pins don't go through here. So I'm going to have to wire this with some mechanics wire like I did on the other ones to tighten them down. So little change in what was on here before, but not a biggie. So we'll tighten this down, and we've got all 4 pistons back into the engine. We've got the valves all done and set accordingly, so that's great. Alright, so let me get the torque wrench on these, and these should be torqued down to 35 pounds. I just make them snug, and then I just reach in here with the torque wrench, trying to keeping it even as much as possible. Just so that piston runs smooth. There we go. So now I'll just run some mechanic wire across here. I don't think the other one shows. Maybe it does. I don't know. So this is where I've put some mechanic wire between the nuts to lock them down. So I'll do this on this other one, and we should be good. Alright, so I'm getting ready to put the timing cover back on. So I'm going to put the gasket on here. I'm going to put some sealer on here. In the kit that I purchased, it took me a couple of minutes because I couldn't get the gasket to line up. And I'm like, well, it was real close, but yet it was off. It just didn't see. I was off a hole somewhere, and I just couldn't figure it out. So the kit I have comes with 2 timing gear cover gaskets. One's for a front mount distributor and one's for a side mount distributor. So that's what was throwing the gaskets off. So if you buy the rebuild kit with all the gaskets, just make sure that you grab the right timing gear cover. And I also took the time and cleaned up all of the edges around here so I get a nice seal on there, and the same thing on the block itself. I've cleaned this up. So I'll put a little gasket sealer on here, and then we can go ahead and put the timing cover on. Just about ready to put the gasket on the oil pan here, and I was just kind of looking at it and going back over it, giving it a light sanding around the corners. And this corner here, though I didn't catch it with my eye, but going through it and just making sure that everything was clean, there was quite a bit of old gasket left in this corner right here. So it's a good thing I did decide to take a couple of minutes and just go back over this. Even though I took it to the shop and supposedly they cleaned it, they missed a spot. But we are just about ready to put the oil pan on. I've got the timing cover on, the governor on, and we'll try and get the oil pan on tonight, and we'll call it quits. I know I've got things to do tomorrow night, but wanted to get a good jump on this tonight, so, and we are. Alright, let me get this oil pan on. So on the end of the oil pan, both ends of the crank right here, there's a seal. They call it a rope seal, and that rope seal fits down in here. And I've read that you just have to put some oil on it. I read that you've had to soak it in oil. I figured since it was going to get saturated and you wanted that smooth on the crank, I went ahead and soaked it overnight. But to put this in, it fits right into the groove, and there's 2 different sizes. There's a skinnier one and a thicker one back there. And how you put this in is you keep this level right here going across here, just maybe a 1/16 of an inch up, and then you just press it into the groove right here, and all your excess will be on this side. And then same thing I did on the engine block. Once I have it in there firmly, I just take a razor blade and cut it flush. All right. There's a hard core in the center, so there we go, nice and flush right here. So that's where the rope seal goes on your oil pan. Again, one in the front and one in the back. All right, well tonight we got the oil pan back on. Made sure that that was nice and tight, and I cleaned all the bolts completely in cleaner before I put them back on, and I just went ahead and scraped all the rust and stuff off of the bottom of the oil pan. And my game plan tonight is I'm just going to go ahead and put a good coat of primer on this so that it'll be ready for paint. This is a good time to make sure this is fully covered while I got full access to it. So we got the oil pan on tonight. I'll put some primer on it, and then we'll throw the flywheel on so that tomorrow we'll be ready to attach it back to the tractor. Alright, I've got the head gasket on, and as you can see by the color, I've got the spray gasket maker on there. And this is what was recommended to me by the auto parts store when you're replacing the head gasket. It's called Copper Top. Copper Top to me was suntan lotion growing up, but I guess it can be for gasket making as well. So here is the head gasket. We're ready to put that on. And now I've also taken all of the bolts for the head itself and cleaned them, soaked them in part cleaner, and cleaned all the threads, so that when I go to torque these down, I'll get an accurate reading. And the book says to set them down for 50 to 55 pounds for studs and 65 to 70 for bolts. So since I've got the bolts, I'll be torquing these down to about, we'll just set it at about 68, cut the difference. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this, this head on this engine. So here I have the head torqued down where it should be, according to all of the specs, according to the book. And then I went ahead and turned the crank here, listening to see if I hear anything hitting the head and feeling for any kind of vibration when I go to turn it. Seems to be turning smoothly still, and no, I don't see an issue, so we should be fine. So we'll go ahead and get these tappet covers on. I've got those soaking in part cleaner right now because the old cork seal that was on there was a little difficult to get off, so had to soak them for a little bit. So we'll get the tappet covers on, and then the next thing we'll do is put the flywheel on. Actually, we'll put it on an engine hoist, and then we'll put the flywheel on. But we're making progress today. Alright, now that I've got the engine off of the engine stand and onto the hoist, I now have access to the flywheel right here. And so now we need to, or I should say the back end of the crankshaft, so that I can put the flywheel in. Now the flywheel has a couple of dowel holes in it. I need to get them lined up with this. And the problem is that this flywheel is very heavy, and when I go to pick it up and then try and put it inside here, I've got no room to grab it with my fingers. It's pretty tight all the way around here. So I've got to stick a screwdriver into the flywheel like this, into where one of the bolts go, lift it up, and then line it up here, and then try and line it up with the dowels. So I'm going to try and do that, and without dropping it, since it is a new ring gear on there. But let me see if I can get that done and get that flywheel back onto the engine. Well, I had to do this a little bit differently than I originally planned. Trying to do this on the engine hoist, it was just moving too much, and I couldn't get it to where I could put it on there square and straight. So I ended up taking it off the engine hoist, sitting it here on a block of wood, and just lifting the flywheel onto the crankshaft here. These are the two dowels, and I had to get those lined up just perfectly to line up with the holes there to put the bolts in. So it's on there now. Again, not how I originally planned to do it, but I improvised and overcame. So, alright, let me get this flywheel on, and then we'll put it back on the hoist and then put it on the end of the tractor here. That's my goal for today. Alright, I'm ready to join the engine block back into the tractor, and trying to get that aligned is going to be quite challenging. So I was online and saw where somebody had taken some bolts and cut the heads off of them, so that, and then threaded them into the engine block itself, so that they'll go ahead and align into the holes here on the chassis right by the transmission. So all I got to do is align this, and then in order for it to feed itself in, is go ahead and turn the PTO, and then that'll line itself up with the clutch or the pressure plate. So we're going to go ahead and attempt to do that. So I'm going to slide this engine into the chassis tonight and get this thing mounted back on. So as you can see right here, how having those bolts with the heads cut off help to align it in on the engine itself. So I've got to go ahead and lower this just a little bit so it's a little bit more even, and then it should slide right in. Now if it doesn't slide right in, go ahead and turn your PTO, and then it'll turn the shaft inside so that it'll line up with the spline going into the clutch and pressure plate. Okay, we've got the engine attached back to the tractor now, and so I've got to go ahead and finish prepping for paint. I've got a few more areas back here that I want to scrub, where I've got a little bit more paint. The engine block itself is pretty good, so as you can see I've got it primed in a couple of spots already, up front here and underneath. I didn't prime the head yet, or the tappet covers. I figured I'd go ahead and prime all that together. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and put the chassis back together, put the front end, roll that back in tomorrow, and attach that so I can get these blocks out of here so that when I go to paint, I can paint all underneath. I'll get a couple of jack stands back here as well as in the front so that I can, when I paint, I paint most of everything. But that's where we're at today, so I'm going to end it here and then pick up with the front end on the reattached and get ready for paint. Now my game plan is that, or I'm hoping that when I put everything back together it works and I don't have any problems, but I don't want to go ahead and put it back together and then take everything back off and then paint. So I'll just go with the assumption that I did everything right and it will start when I want it to. Alright, well that's it for tonight, folks. Take care, God bless, and we'll see you in the next video.